15 minutes past the 8 o'clock hour, and Chris Lenois back with you on the Green Mountain Mornings program this Tuesday, November the 29th. Spending the remainder of today's program, however, visiting with Mike Faher, reporter for VTDigger, as well as the Commons, as well as the Brattleboro Reformer. His byline appearing in all those fine publications, as well as their online websites. And you can find out more about him on Twitter at Mike Faher. Good to see you, Mike. Thanks for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before we get to the news of the day and the stories that you're covering, this is something that I ask a lot of my guests to do during inclement weather days until they approve my capital request for a helicopter. How are the roads out there?
They're not bad now.
Yeah.
It's about 33 degrees, so the sidewalks were a little slippery, but the roads were fine.
Yeah, raining a little bit still?
Yeah.
Okay, so be careful out there. I was saying how, bridge may ice before road. I experienced that this morning, and Fish over on the iconic Rock 92.7 side of things mentioning that he had a little bit of a slip on I-91 this morning coming in. I want to go back, Mike, to actually the weekend before Thanksgiving, because last time you were in here was right after the reporting of the sale of Vermont Yankee from Entergy to this North Star group out of New York. And then almost on the heels of that was this other story about one of the partnering organizations known as WCS. I knew I was going to get that wrong. Waste Control Specialists under lawsuit, or they weren't under lawsuit at the time. This lawsuit filed by the U.S. Department of Justice pretty soon after this announcement of the sale.
Yeah, that's right. I think maybe a week, 10 days, something like that.
Now, this has nothing to do, let's be clear, this has nothing to do with the sale of Entergy, the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant, to this group out of New York. But it is interesting to note that this has happened at the same time. Talk a little bit about the details of this lawsuit that the federal government is bringing against WCS.
Yeah, so the basics are there's this company, Waste Control Specialists. They're based in Dallas, I think, and they want to merge with or be acquired by another company that's based in Salt Lake City, and that company is called Energy Solutions. And these are two major players in the business of disposing of low-level radioactive waste, which sounds kind of arcane, but it's a big deal because there's not a lot of places in the country where that kind of stuff can go. And so they, about a year ago, announced that they were going to merge, and now the U.S. Department of Justice says, not so fast, because we think you're going to create a monopoly if you do that. So the Department of Justice has filed a lawsuit to stop the merger.
Right. Essentially, I think it says in your story something like they basically serve 36 of the 50 states.
Including Vermont.
And no other provider for those states. So it sounds to me like this is already an industry that has some regulation, maybe through the NRC. Is the waste management aspect of it something under the NRC?
Certainly the NRC has jurisdiction over anything that's radioactive, that sort of thing. I know, the U.S. Department of Transportation regulates the transport of waste in some respects. So there's some federal oversight. Now, this is a whole other ballgame when the Department of Justice gets involved.
Right.
The reason I wrote about it, you're right, the lawsuit doesn't mention the sale of Vermont Yankee, but one of the defendants here, Waste Control Specialists, is supposed to be a key player in the accelerated decommissioning of Vermont Yankee if indeed the plant is sold.
Right. They were part of that group under North Star that was going to handle the cleanup at Vermont Yankee. And it seems to me a really key player. Again, you write in your story about how they have a low-level radioactive waste disposal site in Andrews, Texas. That, to me, seems to be a key part of the whole process, right?
It would seem to be, yeah. And so my question was, well, gee, if the federal government, which also has to approve the Vermont Yankee sale, is now suing one of the players in that sale, what does that mean? And I guess at this point we still don't know, except for the fact that the NRC, which has to approve the sale of Vermont Yankee, said that they would certainly be taking a look at the lawsuit and I guess trying to determine if they have any concerns going forward with this company being one of the players in Vermont Yankee decommissioning.
Now, you reached out to Entergy for comment, and they chose not to comment on it, as probably is appropriate when you're talking about federal legal action. Right. But is there can we project that they knew something like this was possible? I mean, lawsuits like this, antitrust lawsuits, don't just pop up out of thin air. I imagine there had been an investigation going on, and if they're doing their due diligence into the buyer, they feel pretty good about whatever that outcome is with North Star, that they're not worried about this lawsuit impacting the sale.
Yeah, I mean, this is a world that's a little bit beyond my world, but I would guess that, as you say, that there was probably some idea that, hey, this could happen or is happening. The two companies, the two defendants in this Department of Justice lawsuit, issued a statement pretty quickly on the heels of the other lawsuit. It didn't appear to me that they were taken by surprise. I don't know that for a fact because they're not really being real talkative right now either.
Right.
But yeah, one would hope that in the course of doing, as you say, their due diligence, that this might have come up at some point.
And I mean, I would think so again, because you talk about their near monopoly, even when if it was just two players. It's not like North Star can go out and say, all right, they're in legal trouble, we'll just get another vendor to replace WCS. There's no other option right now for the state of Vermont other than WCS.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's Energy Solutions and WCS, and I guess those are the two options, because actually right now, Energy Solutions is handling the disposal of tainted groundwater from Vermont Yankee.
Good point.
There's just all kinds of tie-ins here. So but it is, as you say, an exclusive business, and there's a lot of this stuff. When you talk about low-level waste, you're not talking about the spent nuclear fuel, but you're talking about, I don't know, I think everything else.
Right.
From tools to debris to dirt, this is all considered low-level waste, and it all has to go somewhere.
Yeah, and apparently that somewhere might end up being Andrews, Texas, if these things go on. But that doesn't change the SAF store process of storing the spent rods at the plant. North Star probably still going to go forward with that regardless of this. There is a meeting this Thursday for the Citizens Advisory Panel, and this is North Star is expected to be at that meeting, you said?
Yeah, this is the Vermont Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel, and this is sort of the coming out party, I guess, for North Star, the company that wants to buy Vermont Yankee and speed up the decommissioning. They're scheduled to make a presentation. It's going to be the CEO named Scott State presenting. This meeting is from 6 to 9, I think, at the Brattleboro area middle school this Thursday. Okay, something that you'll be at and reporting on, and we'll be looking for it under all your bylines in VTDigger, the Commons, and the Brattleboro Former. Mike Faher, my guest during the remainder of today's program, 802-254-5286, if you have any questions for him about stories that he's reporting on in the community. 32 degrees outside at 21 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. Green Mountain Mornings continues now with your hosts Chris Lenois and Mike Faher, reporter for the Brattleboro Former, the Commons, and Vermont Digger. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Faher. Like, I got to try and vary up all the different places you write for, Mike, and try and mention one first, one middle, one last. I can't show favorites here. You got to see my business card. You got to see your business card, indeed. Well, the placards that BCTV runs for these is quite lengthy too. If people don't have a big screen, they might miss out on some of the places that you write for. But always great to have you in here talking about the stories that you've worked on in the past week or two in some cases, especially with the holiday and kind of the slow time happening in news. On Thanksgiving Day, the Reformer published your article about John Gannon, who is the new state representative for Wilmington, Halifax, and a portion of Whitingham. I love that, how you talk to, Laura Sibilia. She represents a portion of Whitingham, and Manwaring prior to John Gannon, now representing that district. Nice to get to know him, especially his background beyond Wilmington, something that I wasn't aware of. It had to be pretty impressive to you. How much did you know about John Gannon going into that interview? Well, not a lot, and that's partly because no one ran against him. So he didn't, we didn't need any debates or anything. I think he put out a few letters, and he did some door-to-door campaigning in the district. But from the media standpoint, he didn't get a lot of attention. So yeah, as you mentioned, he worked for 20 years in Washington D.C. Some of that time in enforcement with the SEC, which is a big deal.
Yeah, well, and he is an attorney. Be interested to hear what he thinks about the whole EB5 right investigation that's going on, especially living in the Mount Snow Valley and some of the issues they've been having with EB5. But he is a known quantity in the towns of Wilmington and Whitingham and Halifax. These places they represent, it wasn't like the voters there needed to get to know him. Even though he did do the work, as you point out, went door-to-door meeting with people, it sounds to me like he had established a presence there.
Yeah, he said that post his Washington work, he moved to Vermont, back to Vermont, full-time in 2011. And since then, he's definitely been active. He's on the select board in Wilmington. He's on, it's Wilmington Works, the Wilmington Fund Vermont. He's the past president of the Deerfield Valley Rotary, so he's a busy guy.
Yeah, he's been out there certainly doing what he does. And Happy Dog Farm, with him and his wife owning that poultry operation in Wilmington. So people certainly know John. People knew Ann very well. And obviously Ann sort of handpicked John to be her successor there. But a sense from you in terms, and I know always state politics isn't your bailiwick in what you recover, but a sense from you about the loss of Ann for that community as their state rep?
Well, certainly she's incredibly knowledgeable. She's a force to be reckoned with. She's kind of no nonsense. She herself is very financially astute. I think she spent some time on appropriations.
Right.
But as you mentioned, Ann, I think, looked around her community and sort of landed on John Gannon as somebody that she thought would continue what she thinks is a long line of strong representation there.
Yeah.
Nobody else saw fit to challenge him. So,
and whenever I spoke to Ann, whenever I invited her on this program, or oftentimes would call on her during State House while it was convened, education.
Sure.
That's what she wanted to talk about, and especially in this new age of Act 46, and she served on the Education Committee, and I still remember her saying this when the proposal was coming out of committee. She said, I'm going to hold my nose and I'm going to vote for it because she felt like we have to do something. Sounds to me like John Gannon is in step with her as far as what is wrong and perhaps right, but at least the direction Vermont needs to go with regards to Act 46 and education. Well, let's call it district reunification. Let's not call it education reform. That's a little too heady.
Well, certainly they both talked about education in the context of education funding, and I know Ann wants to, in some way, continue, looking at that issue even from outside the legislature, and that's something that John Gannon talked about right away. And he does not believe that Act 46 and all the mergers that it's pushing is going to solve the education funding problem, especially for his district. He also thinks that perhaps Act 46 should be amended so that school districts have more time to consider mergers.
I don't see how they can't do that during this session. Every single candidate I asked about Act 46, and I think I asked every single candidate about Act 46. Obviously, it's a hot button issue. One of the questions I asked was, do you think they should give these districts more time and roll back that first incentive? Give everybody the chance to take advantage of the biggest tax break. And they all said yes. So it sounds to me like people are in tune for that.
It's interesting, though. I'm working on a story this week where I hadn't realized this, but apparently the State Board of Education last month, a few weeks ago, took a vote where they said we don't think there should be more time.
Interesting.
And I've been corresponding with Emily Long, another one of our representatives, an education committee member, who said she's actually heard from some folks who said, don't mess with this law, especially in the first year of the legislative biennium. We've been working so hard, and we're right on the cusp of doing something here. Like, it could really throw a wrench into things if you do that.
So she doesn't want to make any changes.
Well, I don't know that it's Emily who doesn't want to make changes, but she basically what she said is she hasn't heard any calls for wholesale change, especially quick wholesale change, and she's definitely heard from folks who don't want that deadline pushed back right away.
Interesting.
So it's going to be an interesting debate, I think.
Yeah, well, and Emily Long, another Windham County state representative representing the Newfane and Townsend area. She was part of another story that you wrote in the past week and a half around the foster care system here in Windham County. Now, WKVT, we did a call to action about child welfare a couple of months ago now. I can't remember exactly. They all sort of, I can't remember which one we do in which order. We've got one coming up on Thursday about internet safety. But we had Sue O'Brien, the district rep for DCF. We had Mike Mrowicki, somebody who works on the Human Services Committee. A real big problem here. Talk a little about this meeting that was gathered that you covered.
Yeah, so I think it was mid-November. The purpose of the meeting was to talk about when kids are placed out of home, what effect might that have on school attendance, which is a big concern for the Wyndham Southeast folks. And that was part of it. But for me, one of the eye-openers was looking at the statistics that show how many kids in Wyndham County are in foster care. And it had jumped from around 100 in the fall of 2015 to 150 and now even 160 in the fall of this year. I mean, you're looking at a 50% jump in 1 year's time. It
is staggering, and it's numbers that bear repeating because you keep having to have these conversations so everybody is aware of what's going on in these different forms. Emily Long saying she was shocked to hear this at the time, and I think anybody who comes in contact with this. Was this a meeting particularly to tell lawmakers about the issue here in Wyndham County prior to the State House, or what were the goals of this particular get-together?
Yeah, it was definitely a legislative meeting with the idea being let's communicate directly so everyone's speaking the same language before the session starts. But there was a lot of ground covered. I mean, things like, as I say, absenteeism in school, foster care placements, the challenges that foster parents face, and there are so many. It was just in the few hours that I sat there a really daunting thing to listen to. You have the DCF folks talking about they just don't have time to look at the big picture for anything. Right. They're just putting out fires every day.
Now, a side part of the story had to do with the Academy School and a program that the social worker there does. Pronounce the name for me, Jody Matulke?
Yeah, I'm going to go with that.
You'll go with Matulke? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Jody and family, if I'm butchering that name. But somebody who is trying to do more outreach beyond the school borders, is this something that can be modeled, or is it something that's already being modeled in other school districts across Vermont?
It sounded to me like it is a new thing, at least in Wyndham Southeast. The idea is you don't just have a guidance counselor in school or a counselor in school or a social worker. You have somebody who is school-based but goes out into the community to sit around, kitchen tables with families and try to figure out, okay, so what's the problem? What kind of services do you need? How can we hook you up with those services? And obviously this is one person in one of Brattleboro's schools, and it's probably a relatively small caseload because you can only do so much. But it sounded to me like it was making a difference, at least for those families that she was helping.
Yeah, well, it is a guidance counselor now. It's not just about academics. It's guidance on all these different levels, especially at the elementary school level. And so many families rely on the schools now to provide the different services. I've heard people propose, like, why don't we just put a dentist in the schools or a physician in schools? And there's some credence to that as far as, when you talk about surrounding low-income families with services, a school is a place they already are. I mean, there is some sensibility for that. I don't know if any of the lawmakers gave an idea of what they have in mind as far as moving forward on initiatives in the upcoming legislative session, or were they mostly just kind of listening at this meeting?
I think it was mostly listening, and part of the problem is everybody knows it can't fall only on the schools. And there's only so much resources that schools don't have money to go out and hire 5 people to go out and sit around kitchen tables and try to help people. So it's
and that doesn't solve the drug problem that's causing a lot of this either.
Yeah. Drugs, mental illness is another part of it. It's a really daunting issue.
Yeah, well, good that you had a chance to. I mean, a lot of times you're doing reporting on things that are happening. A little bit different story for you. Flex a different muscle in your journalistic body with doing a more of a big piece like this, a think piece, and hopefully you'll be doing more of that. You think you'll be doing more of that in the coming days or weeks or months or?
Yeah. I'd love to. I like to write long, get windy.
Indeed. Well, appreciate you coming on here and sharing it with us here on the Green Mountain Mornings program, Mike. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks a lot.
You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Faher. You can also find his writing in VTDigger, The Commons, and the Brattleboro Reformer. We'll be back to wrap up this edition of Green Mountain Mornings right after these messages.